My name is Peter McClay, and I'm a partner in the Construction, Infrastructure and Utilities practice here at Mason Hayes & Curran in Dublin. I specialise in providing legal advice in relation to Irish energy projects. Now, I'm joined today by my colleague, Gráinne Tiernan, who specialises in planning and environmental matters. Now, in recent years, we've seen an increase in the number of data centres being connected and built in Ireland, and there seems to be no sign of this trend abating, which is not entirely surprising given that we're living more and more of our lives online. And in fact, the data comprising this message will be coming to you via at least one, if not more, data centres. So what then does Irish law make of these things? And what legal permissions do you need to build one? Well, today we'll be looking at 4 key planning and environmental issues. And to start with, Gráinne is going to take us through the need for planning permissions.
So first of all, obviously, if you want to build a data centre, you're going to have to apply for planning permission. Now, this needs to be done through the standard permitting process where you have to apply to the local authority. Now, there was an amendment that was introduced in 2018, which was intended to designate certain data centres of a specific size as strategic infrastructure. Now, this would mean that the application would go directly to An Bord Pleanála and would be intended to kind of streamline and fast track the process. But however, this hasn't yet been enacted. So as the law currently stands, you still have to go through the standard permitting process through the local authority.
Okay. Like, it sounds like that might have been quite useful for data centres. Do you have any idea why the strategic infrastructure mechanism wasn't commenced for them?
It's hard to say, but there has been a little bit of negative press in the last number of years because of the upsurge in data centres that are being built around Ireland. So because of that, perhaps the government was a little bit reluctant to streamline the planning process.
Okay.
The second point I'm going to talk about is environmental impact statement. So as we have said, data centres are quite typically large developments, so they will often be developed in phases on the basis of a master plan. Now, also due to their size, they'll obviously be subject to environmental assessments, such as an environmental impact assessment. So what has to be assessed? Is it the phase that is being built at the time, or is it the entire master plan? Now, this point was brought into the Supreme Court in respect of the Apple data centre that was supposed to go ahead in Athenry in Galway, but didn't for a number of different reasons. And the Supreme Court said in this instance that what has to be assessed is what is before the planning board at the time. And the reason for this was basically because the court thought that it would just be too difficult to assess developments that may or may not go ahead in the future. And they might be subject to kind of various different criteria, such as, climate action restrictions or energy supply. Okay,
fair enough. Your data center plans can be quite advanced or quite elaborate when they're first brought forward. Just in terms of that, what types of environmental impacts are typically of most relevance in relation to data centers?
Well, obviously, again, due to their size, there's always the risk that they're going to impact on habitats and animal species. But the environmental assessments that are carried out are intended to deal with these kind of impacts, and they may introduce certain mitigation measures. But then also in certain situations, the development won't go ahead if there are impacts or if the impacts are too onerous. There is also environmental impacts which relate to industrial emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, which brings me to my next point on environmental permits. So data centers need standby generators to make sure that they have a continuous electricity supply. Now, this is where it can get a little bit confusing because what environmental permits you need will very much depend on the thermal output of the standby generator. So the thermal output is a measure of energy output. So you'll have to calculate that to basically determine what kind of environmental permits that you need. Now, depending on the size of these standby generators, you may need a greenhouse gas permit or you may need an industrial emissions license. or you may need both.
Yes, let's not forget that these aren't quite post-industrial facilities. They do have a sizable impact in terms of heat and power. And on that note, the last topic we're going to cover is electrical connection to the Irish electricity system. Now, you made a very good point that a supply of power is vital to data center operation. Because of the number of data centers being planned and proposed for Ireland, EirGrid, which is the Irish operator of the electricity transmission system, has actually forecast they could constitute up to 27% of all electricity demand by the end of the decade. So it's a fairly major load. Now, for this reason, EirGrid has devised a special connection regime for data centers, and it involves something called flexible demand. Now, that's when if a data center is connecting somewhere constrained, such as Dublin, where there's a lot of demand for power already, then at times of system stress, EirGrid can require that the data center have its electricity supply turned down. Now, to mitigate against that, it's open to data center developers to also put in standby generation, which is where your previous point about environmental impacts comes in. So there we go. We focused in the session on 4 major types of environmental permits that Irish data centers will need. Now, that's not where it ends. Obviously, there'll be plenty of other legal agreements that data center developers need. Things like land agreements, building contracts, lease and co-location agreements for tenants. But we hope that today's session has given you an insight into the environmental and planning permits that are going to be relevant to Irish data center development. Thank you.
So thank you today for visiting our vlog. And if you want to have more video insights, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want more information in relation to data centers, visit mhc.ie/data centers.